On October 1, it will be 15 years since I began hosting this program full time.
Wow.
And I tell you that not to create a fake anniversary date, but to tell you that shortly after that, we began speaking with Anne Montague, who at that time was in the early stages of trying to make sure that the stories of the folks who at the time called themselves Rosie the Riveter and that collective group of women who worked doing so many different jobs other than riveting, but including riveting, during World War II, while many of their husbands, sons, boyfriends, fathers, whatever, grandfathers were away serving in World War II. And these folks did the jobs that needed to be done. And when the men came back, many of these women were summarily dismissed. Some continued working, but most did not. Well, Anne wanted to make sure that these women got recognition before they passed away. And she's done a great job of getting us interviews with so many of these folks in a movement that has now spread throughout the world. And with that, we are happy to bring in Rense Havinga, who is the curator of the Freedom Museum in the Netherlands. Rense, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us long distance.
Good morning, Rob.
Tell me about the Freedom Museum. And my colleague, Bill Stubblefield, had a question for exactly how and when the Rosie movement became an international one.
Yeah, the Freedom Museum is a World War II museum located in Groesbeek. This is an area that was liberated by the 82nd Airborne during Operation Market Garden. So our mission has always been thanking the American soldiers who liberated us and educating the next generations of Dutch kids about World War II. When we were preparing for 70 years of liberation, of course, there were still some veterans alive then who were coming, and we were also thinking about, well, do we need to broaden our perspective? Are we forgetting people? And we thought it would be wonderful to invite a couple of Rosie the Riveters to be our guests of honor at the 70 years celebration. And we contacted Anne Montague about that, and she loved the idea. And that was how our cooperation started.
Well, that's a great story. And June Robbins, who attended that ceremony, was on our program just about a week or two ago, and was just a marvelous conversation with June, who turns 99. And Rense, she said to me, make sure that you call me on my birthday. So I put that on my calendar. I think in about another month or two, she's going to be 99. To make sure that I give her a call on her birthday. Tell us about the museum. I guess there's the greater museum, and then there's the part dedicated to the Rosies, right?
Yeah, the larger museum tells the story of freedom in the 20th century. So it starts with the rise of National Socialism, the occupation of the Netherlands, on to the liberation and the reconstruction after the war, and what we can do today to, protect freedom and democracy. In the middle of the museum, in the permanent exhibition, is a part about the importance of women in the factories producing the materials that made the work of the soldiers possible, that made our liberation possible. And that is, we had temporary exhibitions with far more information, but now we have a smaller permanent chapter in the permanent exhibition where June Robbins' story is part of that bit of the exhibition, and her draft tools that you see used to make drawings for the shipyard are also on the display there.
Oh, that's great. It's good for June. She's got recognition internationally too. That's marvelous. Rense, how long have you been the curator there?
13 years now. I started in 2011, so almost 14.
Now, obviously, the Netherlands occupied by the Nazis. Were there at the time, though, the equivalent of a Dutch Rosie in your country?
Well, being occupied, we of course didn't make war materials for the Allies. We would have loved to, but that was not a possibility. But women had an important role in many resistance groups, as well as in taking over the work of men who were forced to do forced labor in Germany and keeping the family alive during the famine that we suffered at the end of the war. So there are many very brave women in the Netherlands who deserve to be honored for their World War II work.
And they are honored in the museum as well?
Yes, we absolutely have a lot of stories about women's resistance fighters, women who smuggled refugees to safer places, and the other things that women did in the wartime.
Bill.
Yeah, you said other things. Everybody I've talked to applaud Rose of the Riveter, but what pushback there's been is that it's fairly the image is of one group, but yet the women participate in so many different ways, such as farming and filling in the fact that men were not there. Is there still some in the Netherlands? Is there still some concern that the image is somewhat limited, or it should be much broader than what it is, just the riveter per se?
Well, there's a reason that the story we chose for June is not the story of a riveter, someone who built stuff, but someone who made technical drawings, which shows that there are many kinds of jobs and many kinds of places where women contributed to the war effort. And in the exhibition, the resistance stories, for example, is someone who smuggled food rations to get food to people who were in hiding. So we try to show many different kinds of work that women did. We do notice that there's still some pull towards the things that are stereotypically male jobs, like the arms part of the resistance and the construction of airplanes, that those are seen as maybe more important or more interesting. That is unfortunate. We do try to show stories that don't fit that stereotype.
You've mentioned resistance a couple of times and the role of the women in the resistance movement. There's a marvelous book, A Train in the Winter. Are you familiar with that book?
Oh, no, I don't think I've read that.
It was the women in France that were caught up in the resistance movement, and they were all captured and sent to concentration camps. What makes the book interesting is that all the interviewees were still living at the time, probably about 40 years or so after the war, short enough so they still had vivid memories, but long enough so some of the raw emotions were finished, were over. I found it one of the most enlightening books I think I've ever read. It gave a real insight to the resistance movement and the consequences thereof.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. I'll have to give that a read.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah. Yes. What's the name of that book again, Bill?
And I've forgotten the author. A Train in the Winter, and it's picked up its name that the women being transported from France to the concentration camp in January or February, and the difficulties. One, the train ride, but the problems was just beginning at that time. So.
Well, and I think
it's by Caroline Moorhead, by the way.
Okay.
All right, go ahead, Maria.
Thanks. And I think, too, I would say, Rense, that some of the not issues, but some of the things that we don't know about the Rosies are because they were generally reluctant to talk about, to talk about what they had done, and not unlike soldiers in World War II. My father was a World War II Army staff sergeant. My mom actually worked as a welder. And I have this wonderful picture of her and her best friend, Franny, with their arms around each other in the factory doing the work. But I have to tell you, that wasn't something that either of them shared, and certainly not what my father shared about his experiences in World War II. Was just a different generation. If you pulled it out of them, I think it was a little bit easier to have conversations. I remember talking to my father. We started a series at the Journal called Unsung Heroes, which is still going on today, and I sort of outlined what the format was going to be for the stories. And I said, Dad, I want you to tell me a little bit about what you did so we can introduce the series. And he was like, why would I want to do that? I kind of didn't. I put that piece of my life behind me. And I think it's sort of the same in this. But if you look at this picture of my mom and her best friend, Franny, I mean, clearly they recognized that what they were doing was important. And so, yeah, more commentary there, Rense, about that generation of women as well as of men.
Yeah, we see a lot of that in the Netherlands too, regardless of whether people were in the resistance or just tried to make it through those 5 years of occupation. World War II was for a lot of people the most difficult time of their life. And at the same time, people recognized that other people had it even worse. So there was often a lot of tendency to leave that part behind, to not make themselves the center of the story, and to, after a while, not speak about it at all and try to move on, which sometimes ended up being really difficult for people because they didn't get to process everything they'd experienced.
Sure.
Yeah, going back a little bit of the history of the National Liberation Museum, the Rosie part was incorporated after the museum was in operation. Is that fair?
Sorry, what's the question exactly?
The question was, when was the National Liberation Museum started, and when did the Rosie exhibit become incorporated?
Well, the museum started in 1987. At the time, it was almost entirely dedicated to the 82nd Airborne Division, who liberated us. In 2000, we expanded it with more background information for schools, and that's when we had our first mention of Rosie the Riveter with the famous poster. After we met the Rosies in 2015, we started working on a temporary exhibition, which we showed in 2017. And then a permanent segment to the permanent exhibition, which much more information, many more pictures, and the items from June Robbins were added in 2019.
Are you working with any German groups as you try to promote the cause of unity?
Yes, absolutely. We are located 3 kilometers, a little more than 2 miles from the German border. So we work a lot with German groups and German historians. And we try to also tell a diversity of German stories, including German resistance stories and people who try to navigate living in a dictatorship, to create a cross-border understanding of what our peoples went through.
You came to the United States in 2016, Rense, I understand it, for 6 weeks to do some research yourself. What did you do? Who did you speak with? And how did that help you with the museum?
When we decided to do that bigger permanent temporary exhibition in 2017, I went to Baltimore to study the Rosie collection of the Glen L. Martin, Maryland Museum, where the staff was wonderful and kind enough to find me host families to stay and give me access to the archives for 6 weeks. So I spent 6 weeks going through their incredible photo collection and researching mostly what the life of these Rosies was like in practice, what work they did, how long their commute was, how much money they made, and also looking at some of the more sensitive issues of that, like the fact that there was a lot of tension around the segregation of the workplace in those days.
Are there any other museums internationally that are doing what you're doing, Rense?
I wouldn't know. I haven't talked to every museum. I think a lot of museums in Europe make some mention of the existence of Rosie the Riveters, but rarely in great detail.
What was the most interesting, not interesting, but in your mind's eye, what would people not envision? Bill mentioned farmers and such as Rosies in that role. What was the most interesting role that you saw the Rosies playing? How about that?
That's a difficult question. I think the most interesting thing would be the impact that Rosies had on women in the workforce after the war, which was not uncomplicated. A lot of women lost their jobs after the war. Some were fine with giving their job back to a soldier. For others, it was extremely painful. And it took more than a decade before a new generation of women who wanted to go into the workplace rediscovered Rosie the Riveters as a model for the fact that women can do any job. And in the Netherlands, that has become kind of simplified because we didn't live through that. And the Rosies were always just some faraway story here. So to create a more nuanced story about that, I think has been really interesting.
Was there a common theme from the women that you interviewed that tied them all together?
No, they were remarkably different. They had different reasons for taking a job. They did different jobs. Some of them were very happy to, become a housewife after the end of the war. Others never stopped working and were very proud to be part of the rise of women in the workplace. It was actually the diversity of what kind of women they were and what kind of work they did that made them so interesting.
One of the, not characteristics, one of the purposes of the Rose of the Riveter in the U.S. has been planting trees, primarily a dogwood tree. Are you doing the same thing in the Netherlands?
When the Rosies visited in 2015, we planted a dogwood tree with them in their honor. To be honest, it's been struggling here in the Dutch climate. It's not doing very well. So we've been thinking about talking to Anne about, what do we do if this tree can't make it? Can we choose another tree that the Rosies would also like? But we're still trying to see if we can get it to thrive here.
Well, that's a good distinction there. What trees grow best in the Netherlands?
I would guess native trees, but this tree should be able to thrive here. It's just not, and we can't quite figure out why. I guess it's just because the climate has been more unstable and dry here in recent years.
I see. Very good. Well, we're going through a heat wave ourselves right now, so I sympathize if something needs water.
All of us do, that's for sure.
Now, when someone comes to the museum, to your Freedom Museum, what is on the scale of exhibits of interest? How does the Rose of the Riveter Museum stack up with others, say, of a more local nature?
Sorry, I don't quite understand the question.
When I assume a lot of your visitors are from the Netherlands or from Europe, when they walk into the museum, is there quite a bit of interest directed toward Rose of the Riveter exhibit?
Yeah, a lot of people really like Rosie the Riveter. A lot of people are inspired. I mean, still, Rosie the Riveter has been a lot of inspiration on women in the workplace in the Netherlands and in Europe. So a lot of people are familiar with the images from that and, think this is a cool thing. And the pictures that we were able to get from the Glenelg Martin Maryland Museum are so beautiful. They're really stunning, high detailed pictures of how these women worked in the factories. So yeah, that part of the exhibit gets a lot of interest. Of course, some people are more interested in the military side of the story. Some people are more interested in local stories. But this is certainly a popular part of the exhibit.
Rense, is there any plan to expand the exhibit at some point?
For now, no. We're quite satisfied with it. For pretty much every temporary exhibition that we produce, one of our questions is, why is this story always told about men? Is there a part about women? For example, our current temporary exhibition focuses on Native American soldiers in the liberation armies, and we have a segment there dedicated to Native American women who went into either military or war production jobs.
My next question, I'm going to go away from the museum theme for a second and ask more of a personalized question. In your time in your home country, did you grow up with stories of what the occupation was like and then what liberation was like? Were those the sorts of things handed down, or was this something that just wasn't discussed, the German occupation?
I absolutely grew up with stories of the occupation. They're an extremely large part of history education here because they are about the most dramatic thing that happened to the Netherlands in living memory. The story that a lot of the Netherlands grows up with in the Netherlands is sometimes too simple. It's too much focused on, we were victims from the big baddies, and the reality is more complex. Some Dutch people collaborated, some Dutch people sympathized with National Socialists. And the story is very national. There's not a lot about, what happened to Belgium, what happened to France, what happened to Poland. So one of the things that I was really surprised to learn a lot of when I got older and specialized in World War II is what happened in the rest of the world during the World War. So yeah, I grew up with the stories to some respect, but there's limits.
Is there any personal stories from your family's experiences that you learned in particular that really grabbed you?
To be honest, not really. my family doesn't have very specific stories about the war, or they chose not to tell me, which is also very possible.
Yeah, that's very possible because I had 3 uncles in World War II, and they never talked about World War
You
II.
have to pull it out of people at the time. It was just not the way. You just came and dealt somehow. Yeah.
Germany now is obviously very different from Germany then. Is there any lingering resentment or negative feelings toward Germany, and especially being 2 miles from the border where you are, Rense?
Here from the border, there's no resentment at all. Relationships between our towns and the towns across the border were close before the war, and they were close very quickly after the war because everybody's relative. Nobody here has no German relatives. That's pretty much impossible when you live so close together. Further inland in the west of the country, it took longer for people to let go of that anti-German sentiment after the war. Nowadays, it's something you only really encounter with the oldest of the generation that's still alive.
Yeah, I understand. I know that my uncle, who was a machinist, when they opened up a Volkswagen plant in New Stanton, Pennsylvania, you might remember that one, Maria. I remember him saying he wouldn't buy a German car.
Yeah. It was hard for that generation.
It was. You can't blame them. Rense, thank you so much for your time this morning. How can our audience find out more about the Freedom Museum?
They can simply go to our website, freedommuseum.com. And if they're in the Netherlands at any time, we'd be very happy to welcome them to the museum.
Oh, that would be wonderful. We're going to have to take you up on that offer at some time. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.